Okay. Let's start. I just want to talk a little bit about Manhattan Psychology Group as a company. Been established since 2011, and we're a multidisciplinary team of over 200 adult and child psychologists, also neuropsychologists, BCBAs, and special ed teachers. We provide wraparound care, including psychological testing, and also ABA and behavioral and educational services. So we do just the assessments. We also do the assessments and the direct services, ABA services. And then we have a long list of different types of therapies that are provided. And because we do have a multidisciplinary team that ranges all through the different psychology services as well as ABA services. And we also have a selective mutism clinic as well. A lot of our services are provided in home, in clinic, and in schools. We also have virtual and in-person sessions, social skills classes on the Upper West Side, and other one-on-one sessions as well. And we serve all 5 boroughs. So I think we might even have one Connecticut case. We serve private pay clients, commercial-based ABA clients, and our DOE-funded clients as well. So we have lots of different types of cases coming through. Next, I want to talk about MPG's mission and our vision. So our mission is to provide multidisciplinary integrated support for individuals and their families who experience psychological, developmental, and educational challenges. So we're, like I said, we're a multidisciplinary team, and we're trying to support through all these different areas. And our vision is to create a future where individuals and families feel supported, connected, and empowered. And I'm just going to stay on this slide for a second because I want to quickly go over what you need to expect to get your CEU certificates, because I'm going to shortly introduce Blanca as our speaker. So make sure you're here for the full event. There's going to be 2 codes. Make sure you record those codes somewhere. Okay, and you're going to need those for the survey. I will post the survey in the chat, just like I posted the link to the slides and the link to our calendar. So everything will be in the chat. So make sure you're checking the chat at the very end. Okay, and if you want the slides, they're available to you now. So I hope that is clear. There's going to be some poll questions. Those are not for attendance. Those are really just to get you engaged and to check for understanding. So please respond to the polls and make sure to record the code words, okay? And now I'm going to introduce Blanca Frank. She has her Master's of Arts from Teachers College at Columbia University. She's a BCBA and an LBA. She has experience with students in the public and private school settings. She implements evidence-based practices to supervise providers and BCBA candidates that she supervises. She also has experience with teaching, and she uses direct instruction as well as other individualized instructional approaches. So she also kind of specializes in the more academic area of ABA. And she also has a lot of experience in this topic, which is supervision and a little bit more than supervision. So we're gonna get started.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Kristen. That was kind of a very nice introduction for me. I kind of really want to start off by saying that this is an area that I'm very passionate about and constantly always trying to learn as much as possible about. And with that, I want to say that we're going to be touching on a lot of topics that are new, maybe a little bit content heavy. I'm still familiarizing myself with it, getting better at it as I go. So any questions that you have, shoot them in the Q&A. We'll try to get to questions at the end of the webinar, but we're going to move through things a little quickly. By no means do I expect anyone to be fully trained to implement these procedures or these methods. This is more of an introduction to the literature and to give you guys some resources. So let's get started for my very first webinar. How exciting. All right, so the first thing we're talking about is supervision. Why are we talking about supervision and why is it important? I feel that a lot of us are going to be nodding our heads with this. I feel that as a BCBA, we are always wearing multiple hats and we're required to have many competencies in many areas. Okay. And so within supervision, we may be supervising other BCBAs, RBTs or BTs, BACBs if we're in the insurance-based model. When we're doing parent training, we're supervising our parents. And the area that I'm very passionate about is we're always supervising future BCBAs, BTs, and RBTs. And so over the course of the years, we've seen an increase in our field. And so it's very, very important that we're using effective training and supervision methods to make sure that the new generation of BCBAs, no matter how corny that sounds, are qualified to provide quality service for our learners and our families. A quote that kind of struck out to me and that I really like and encompasses supervision is that it's far more than just meeting some basic requirements, checking off some boxes. We really want to make sure that we have clear and reasonable expectations for ourselves as supervisors and for our supervisees. So we want to make sure that the methods that we're using are conceptually sound and that all the methods that we use, like how we use with our learners, are tested for effectiveness and they're refined based on experimental evaluations. And so let's move on to our very first poll. I'm going to let Kristen take over that poll. So the question is, which of these supervision tools do you use or are currently aware of? Select all that apply. I'll give you guys a few seconds. Amazing. Answers are coming in so fast. You guys are so quick. Okay, amazing. So this is pretty typical to the responses that I was expecting. Typically, most people are aware of the ethics code. The next runner up is the 8-hour supervision training. And then we have CEUs, which you guys are all doing tonight. So I put this poll up specifically for the fact that I want to kind of gauge everyone's foundational skills and understand what you guys are coming in with. And so when I propose these new ideas of supervision methods, I'm more aware of the fact that this is truly new information and I want to help develop new supervision methods. So let's move on. Okay. So we're going to start off with behavioral skills training. Behavioral skills training is a kind of a treatment package that we use for staff training, parent training, and working with our learners. In this webinar, we're really going to be focusing on the staff training component of this behavioral skills training. And it's important to note that behavioral skills training really focuses on performance and competency of given skills and skill sets. Like all of the methods that we're going to review tonight, it really requires that the individual meet criteria for competency levels before we consider any skill mastered or acquired. So if we think about that in the context of the individuals that we are supervising and training, in the same notion that we would never expect our learners to move on to new skills without achieving mastery, we wouldn't do that to our supervisees and the individuals that we're training. We want to set them up for success, make sure that we are having data to support that they know what they're doing, so that when we throw them into the field, it's not like feeding them to the wolves. We're putting out individuals who are competent and have mastered the skills that we need them to implement and teach to our learners. So following the notion of making sure that the methods that we're using are empirically based and that they're continuously proven effective through the research, I kind of just want to share for your convenience some of the ways in which behavioral skills training has been used. I provided some citations for everyone. And at your leisure, you guys will have access to these slides so you can take a look at some of the research on behavioral skills training and see how effective it is. Some of the areas are guided compliance, FBAs, behavior plans, direct trial training, teaching conversation skills, and activity schedules. So I'm going to move on to the staff training component for our behavioral skill training. So within this, we have 4 steps. We have instruction, modeling, rehearsal, and feedback. When we're working with training new staff, we want to make sure we're giving very clear and concise instructions. We want to make sure that they understand what is expected of them and that these instructions that we're giving are easy to remember and we're explaining the why. I find it when I tell someone I'm supervising why we're implementing a program, it makes it easier to move through the following steps of modeling, rehearsal, and feedback. In terms of the instructions that we're given, I find that worksheets, handouts, if we have program books that are digital, they're also really, really helpful to have everything accessible and that we can always go back to. Our supervisees can always go back and refer to handouts, refer to the directions and the instructions so that they never feel like they don't know what's going on. Following instructions, we want to make sure we're modeling the behavior or the skill that we want our supervisee to engage in. Why is modeling so important? We all interpret information very differently. And so if we're just giving a direction and expecting them to read the how-to guide to a program without modeling, we might have very high probabilities of miscommunications. So it's important that we as their supervisor demonstrate and model the behavior that we want them to engage in. And once we are done modeling the behavior, whether that be through video modeling or in person, we want to allow the trainee, the supervisee, to rehearse that skill. And by doing so, we're able to catch errors early in advance before they become a behavioral pattern, right? So with the rehearsal comes the feedback. We want to give constructive feedback, but we also want to make sure we're highlighting areas of success. We want to make sure that we are not just focusing on the things that our supervisees are doing wrong, but that we're encouraging them through the learning process and helping them see the things that they're doing good, especially when they're learning a new skill. So yeah. And then when it comes to their progress, we want to make sure that we're keeping track of it so that we're making sure we get them to that mastery criteria. And feedback can be given both written and vocally. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. And I know I'm moving a little bit fast with this, so please keep your questions coming in. I'm going to try to get to all of the questions at the end of the seminar. Okay, so this is the next area of supervision in which I want to talk about. This is the area in which I have the most experience with. This is the part in which I was trained in for my master's program for the past 2 years. This is the teacher performance rate accuracy scale. And this is a direct teacher observation and training method that's predominantly used in CABA schools. CABA schools are the comprehensive application of behavior analysis to schooling. So basically, we're using the principles of ABA and interlocking that with schooling. Full disclaimer here, when I'm saying the word teacher, I don't want anyone to limit it to just school. I want to kind of challenge you to think about it as we're all teachers, whether we're wearing our special education hat, whether we're wearing a BCBA hat, LBA hat. I really want to emphasize the point that when we're using the TPRA, we can use it in school settings, in home settings, and clinic-based settings across insurance-based models. And we can use this measure of supervision for both our RBTs, BTs, paraprofessionals, teacher aides, and so forth. So I kind of want to explain a little bit of what the teacher performance rate and accuracy scale is. I'm going to move my toggle board over so that I'm not blocking myself. Great. So this is a measure for both student and teacher performance. And again, I'm using teacher performance interchangeably with supervisee and trainee. This is a measurement system that is for trial-based learning, which measures the interlocking three-term contingencies, which we refer to as learn units for both the student and the teacher and or supervisee and trainee. I just threw a lot of stuff at you guys. What is the interlocking three-term contingency? When I say interlocking three-term contingency, the learn unit, I mean the antecedent, the behavior, and consequence of both the student and the teacher. And I'm going to touch a little bit more on that on the next slide. But I kind of want to also present to you why the research shows that the TPRA is a beneficial method for supervising and training. So the research shows that we are able to provide objective in the moment feedback to our teachers, our supervisees, and our trainees, We are able to determine if programs are being implemented correctly. This facilitates the recording process that we spoke about earlier of monitoring both the teacher, the student, and the supervisor's effectiveness when we're running programs. And we're also encouraging the establishment of creating and monitoring goals for our students and our teachers, trainees, supervisees. We're also able to measure the rate of instruction and the amount of trials that we're presenting, and if the rate is accurate and correct. And so one of the things I really try to emphasize here is that when we are supervising, as supervisors, our supervisees are going to learn as much as we teach them. In the same way that students learn as well as we teach them, our supervisees are going to learn as well as we supervise them. And so I love the TPRA because as supervisors, we can go back and say, my supervisee is not getting this program. Why? What am I doing that may not be teaching them appropriately? How can I better my supervisory skills? So I think the TPRA, as you guys can see, is a very effective way of kind of monitoring many things at the same time. That being said, it can seem really daunting to be throwing all this information at you. So we're going to take it slow and we're going to break it down. And I'm going to use a little bit of behavioral skills training on you guys, not to mastery, but I'm going to kind of model how the TPRA is used and give you guys an opportunity to practice as well. So let's take a closer look at the TPRA and some of these new terms that I just threw at you guys. I'm just taking a time look. Great, we still are on time. Okay, so that term, learn unit, referring to the interlocking three-term contingency, is basically saying that we have the antecedent, the behavior, and the consequence for both the student and the teacher. So let's break that down into the components of the learn unit as shown by the literature. So the first component is the student's behavior, right? Is the student attending to the instruction? When the student is attending to instruction, this functions as an antecedent for us, the teachers or the supervisees or the trainees' behavior of delivering the first instructional antecedent to the student. The instructional antecedent is then going to evoke the behavior of the student, which then functions as the consequence to the teacher and is the antecedent for the teacher to deliver the consequence. So that would either be reinforcement or correction to the student. I can feel so many people staring at me through the screen going, what is this lady talking about? So I'm kind of going to use an example in the next slide to walk you through it. I find that examples help me a lot to learn the concept of what the learn unit was and what the interlocking three-term contingency is. So let's take a look at this example. We're going to be running a program with a student. And so on one side, we see the three-term contingencies for the teacher. And on the other, we see the contingencies for the student, right? So the student is attending to the teacher. Great. That's my sign that I am ready to deliver my first set of instructions, which is my behavior. So if I tell the student, okay, great, you're paying attention, nice job looking at me. Let's count to 10. That's my behavior influenced by the student attending to me. And that now becomes the student's antecedent. Count to 10 being me, the teacher, saying count to 10 is the student's antecedent. The student's behavior then is, if they know how to do it, let's say if they, in the perfect world, are emitting this correct response, the student will count to 10, which is wonderful because now that influences our behavior to say, good job, you counted to 10, amazing. And we're going to provide that consequence that gives the student the reinforcement for emitting the correct response. That's a learn unit. So we're going to have a video model where we'll break this down more, but I find that examples usually help understand the learn unit. And as we move forward, we're going to have a few exposures to kind of dissecting and understanding the three-term contingency within the learn unit. Okay, what does this TPRA look like? The TPRA has changed since I started my master's program. It has changed from the way it looks in this research article conducted by Ross, Singer, Dudek, and Greer in 2005, but the core elements are still the same, which are we're looking at the teacher's antecedent, the student's behavior, and the teacher's consequence. So when I'm doing this in kind of like a clinical setting or I'm at like a student's home observing a BT, I just get a blank piece of paper. I write teacher antecedent, I'm going to do that now so you guys can see how I do it. I write student behavior, and then I write teacher consequence. You guys are going to see my very horrible handwriting. And then I write the amount of trials we're running, and I kind of write it down this way in columns so that I'm able to run the program and take data. So let's break it down a little bit more. Here on the bottom, you're going to see some calculations. That's kind of referring back to what I was saying earlier about how the TPRA helps determine the rate of instruction. And what I mean by that is that we want to make sure that we're maximizing learning, that when we're working with our learners, we're utilizing that time as academic engaged time. Meaning, when I am supervising someone, I want to make sure that they understand how to organize their day, how to organize their programs, how to organize their time with the student, make sure that they're at mastery and running this program. They know the ins and outs, how to run this program. So when they're there, they're running through Learn Units. Our students are learning, they're acquiring and contacting contingencies. Layman terms, I'm making sure I'm not wasting my client's time. I want to make sure that when I'm there to do my job. I'm there to help my student learn across all domains. Tonight, we're not going to touch too much on the rate. I really want to focus on identifying that 3-term contingency because I think it's going to be the most important takeaway for us, something that we can apply even without having the extensive training on how to use the TPRA. So let me move you to the next slide, which is going to talk a little bit more about the codes that we use in the TPRA. And so again, this was something that I kept with me for a really long time, like a little screenshot on my phone, so that when I was practicing or doing TPRAs, I was constantly referring to this so that over time and with enough practice or rehearsal, I was able to then take the codes by memory. But a check mark is what we use to identify the teacher's antecedent. So is the teacher presenting the antecedent correctly? If she is or he is, we put a check. If for some reason the antecedent is not presented correctly, it's a check and a circle. That indicates to me as a supervisor that the antecedent or the instruction or the way in which I taught my supervisee to deliver the antecedent was not clear enough. I need to go back and we need to review it as a supervisory team. And I really want to pay attention to the rhetoric that I'm using here of team. My supervisee will get better as I get better at supervising. And then we monitor the student's response with a plus or minus. So this is typical to the data sheets that we use day to day, whether in session or outside of session. Plus for correct responses, minus for incorrect responses. I always find that that's the easiest thing for people to learn when I'm introducing the TPRA. The next 2 components we're looking at is reinforcement for correct responses and correction procedures for incorrect responses. I want to make that distinction pretty clear because there are times in which I see my supervisees give reinforcement for a correction procedure, and I think that's a very human and natural thing to want to do. But I propose the idea of allowing the student to learn through the correction, right? So they're going to be represented the antecedent, but there will be no reinforcement because we want to reinforce them independently responding. So when we're looking at the correction codes or the reinforcement codes, super simple. R means reinforcement was done correctly. R with a circle, it means that we either didn't provide reinforcement when there needed to be reinforcement, or we presented it incorrectly. Then correction, super simple, C for correction. Did we present the correction correctly? Amazing, we did. We keep it as a C. Did we omit the correction? Did we present it incorrectly? C with a circle. And so the best way I try to conceptualize this, if there's a circle around any of these codes, it was done incorrectly. If there wasn't a circle around these codes, it was done correctly. So this is, again, we're going to have all these slides provided to you. It is a lot of information that is just being spat at your way. So we're going to take our time, and I'm trying to move through this quick enough so that at the end I can answer what I imagine to be a lot of questions. Okay, so this brings me into what it's like to conduct a TPRA. And so when we're thinking about what we spoke about earlier in terms of behavioral skills training, we want to make sure that that instruction component is correct. And within the CABAS model, we're also making sure that we are providing clear objectives and programs. We are making sure that we're identifying the components of the learn unit, that 3-term contingency with our supervisees, that being the antecedent, the behavior, and the consequence, right? So when I go in and I'm supervising someone, or I'm with another BCBA that we're sharing this case with, I go in and I say, okay, this is my target. For example, the student will imitate the following gross motor movements: clap hands, tap table, raise arms, cover ears. Following a model and the vocal direction, do this within 3 to 5 seconds of the vocal direction. So why do I like this objective so much? I'm targeting exactly what my operands are: clap hands, tap table, raise arm, cover ears. I'm making sure that my supervisee or the BCBA that is with me knows that it's following the model and the vocal direction, do this. And then now I can break it down into the 3-term contingency. What's my antecedent? I'm telling the student, do this. I just modeled and gave them the vocal direction, do this. What is the behavior that we want the student to admit? What are we targeting? What we're targeting is that imitation response. And we're targeting specific operands, so that, let's say, for example, as we're systematically teaching this, if when we get to mastery for these programs, we can target new imitation goals. In this case, I want to make sure that my supervisee knows we're targeting clap hands, tap table, raise arm, and cover ears. And then we really want to be specific about the consequence. And when I say consequence, I don't mean like, oh, you did bad, this is a punishment. I mean, what's the correction procedure look like? What does the reinforcement procedure look like? So if the student is emitting a correct response, we're going to record a plus. So I'm telling my supervisee how to take the data. And then I'm telling them what to do to reinforce that specific student, right? So one of the things I want to always emphasize that every program that we make is individualized to the student and to the learner. So for this specific student that we're going to see in the video, his reinforcer is edible reinforcements and vocal praise. And then I want to give an example, because why not? Let's be more clear. Let's be more specific. Good job. Give him an M&M. Good job. Give him a Skittles. And then we want to go, if it's not a perfect world, what does an incorrect response look like? So if the student doesn't respond, if they emit an incorrect gross motor movement, or if they emit an incorrect response and then the correct response, that would be a minus. And so that way, there's no room for interpretation because I'm telling them exactly what's expected. And then following that model, we want to make sure we explain how to do the correction procedure. And in this case, I'm letting my supervisee know that the antecedent is represented and the student is given an opportunity to independently respond. And if a correct response is admitted during the correction, I'm letting my supervisee know that we're not delivering reinforcement. And now in this case, if we're following that kind of behavioral skills training, we've just finished doing the like the instruction component. Before I even start conducting the TPRA, before I even have them run this program, I'm going to model this program with them. And once they have once I have modeled this program, then we can move into rehearsal where they get to practice. Once my supervisee has practiced this program and they've gotten some opportunities for constructive feedback and reinforcement for the great job that they definitely will be doing, then I would just do a TPRA. Then I want to see, okay, let me watch you do it with a learner, run this program. I'm going to observe you run it, and I'm going to conduct the TPRA. So I'm going to model conducting the TPRA for you guys. So this is the same program that we just dissected. So we just went over the whole 9 yards, right? Our objective, what our learn unit is going to look like. So that antecedent, that behavior, and that consequence. So let's take a look at this video. And Kristen, just let me know if you can hear it.
Okay.
Do this. Yay, you did it. Do this. Yay, you did it.
So let's stop there for a second and break down that antecedent, that behavior, and that consequence using the TPRA. So let's see if my fancy schmancy annotation tool works. did the supervisee emit the correct antecedent? Yeah, they said, do this, and provided the student with the model. So that means I'm going to put a check because they admitted a flawless antecedent. Then the student's behavior. Did my student imitate the response that I wanted to see them imitate? Yeah, the student clapped their hands and followed the gross motor imitation. So that's a plus for my student's behavior. And then we're looking at the consequence. Did my supervisee provide reinforcement? In this case, she said, yay, good job, and gave an edible reinforcer. So I'm going to be putting R for reinforcement. And so if we're looking at this one learn unit, the three-term contingency of the antecedent, the behavior, and the consequence is there. Correct antecedent, correct student response, correct teacher consequence. And we're kind of slowly seeing how everyone's role is playing into this learn unit, right? So the teacher and the student are both interlocking and yoked. Let's look at another example together. Let me stop annotating for a second. Okay.
Yeah! Good job. Crunchy. Do this. Yay, you got it! Perfect.
Amazing. So I want to note a few things here. One of the things I really like about this individual is that she's waiting for the student to be done eating. She's waiting for the student to be attending to her, and then she's delivering instruction. So I kind of want to emphasize that the antecedent for her, the student attending, was there. So then she can deliver the instructional antecedent to the student. So let's break down some of her responses. Did she present the antecedent correct? Yes, she did. She went ahead and said, do this, and provided a model. Oh, I'm trying to annotate without, without clicking annotation. Here we go. So we get to put a check. Did the student emit a correct response? Yes, they did. So we put a plus. Did she provide reinforcement? Yes, she did. She said, good job, and provided an edible. Amazing. So in this video, this teacher, as you can tell, is doing everything correct. And so I'm going to pick on Kristen and ask her to kind of model with me what an incorrect response may look like and what the correction procedure is like. Hey, Kristen, it's your time to shine.
All right.
So let's say, for example, I tell Kristen, do this. And she's touching her mouth. And I go, good job, Kristen. Wait, do this. That's a good job. Thank you. Let's dissect that a little bit. I presented the correct antecedent, right? I made sure that I presented the vocal response of do this and modeled an operant that I wanted the student to emit. The student did not emit a correct response. So we would put a minus here. Now, this is the part I want us to focus on in terms of the teacher consequence. I would put C, because we're emitting a correction, and then circle it. Because if I were supervising, I would say that that was not a correct correction because we reinforced an incorrect response. And then, so if we're doing a correction, remember in the definition that we provided, we wanted to make sure that we only reinforce when the student does the behavior independently the first time. So the act of me correcting them, but then reinforcing would mean that I delivered an incorrect consequence. And so how would I go about as a supervisor reviewing that with my supervisee? I would say, hey, Kristen, you did a really good job doing the antecedent. You were really clear about giving the vocal model and the model of the physical gross motor. You did a good job writing a minus because he admitted it correct, but let's run through the correction procedure, right? So we would say, do this. And if the student does this, we would say, let's try again. Do this. That's how we do it. Ready? Now it's your turn again. Ready? do this. That's how we do it. And then I would explain to my supervisee, you see, I want to make sure that if the student does it independently, so if, let's call him Bob, if Bob had touched his head first, then we would have said good job. But because Bob touched his mouth and then his head, we want to correct him, show him how to do it correctly, and provide no reinforcement. Thanks, Kristen.
No problem.
So I kind of wanted to model what a correction procedure would look like and model how we give that constructive feedback, because I think it's important to always start with highlighting what our supervisee has done well. And when we're providing that constructive feedback, we're not doing it in a way that sounds accusatory or punitive. We're kind of just saying like, hey, like that was a good first try, but let's walk through the correct way of doing it. So that kind of brings us back to that like behavioral skills training model we were talking about, in which we're kind of going between that modeling and that rehearsing and that feedback, those 3 steps. So make sure that our supervisees are being set up for success, right? And I remember for myself, like getting not a errorless TPRA. And what I mean by errorless, I mean that the supervisee has done everything correctly. There's nothing is circled across the student behavior, the consequence, or the antecedent, but instead we are performing everything correctly. And I think sometimes I used to get very focused on doing it right. And so I think it's important as a supervisor to say like, hey, this is your first time doing this. Hey, don't worry about it. Like, this is hard. Like, make sure that we're also reinforcing our supervisees to promote a very professional and respectful supervisee relationship. Why? Because it can only help us as we move forward with our learners. As fluent as we are as a unit is as fluent as we are going to be for our students. So that was my little soapbox, but I'm going to move on to the next slide once my computer cooperates with me. Awesome. And let me just clear some of these annotations. And I kind of want to give everyone a chance to practice. So we're going to rehearse this skill together. Let's start off by talking about what we're going to be targeting here. So our objective is that the student will match 3-dimensional objects when presented in a field of 3. So 1 exemplar and 2 non-exemplars within 3 to 5 seconds of the vocal antecedent match. So if I were to model that for you, I would say, I'm looking around my desk area to match something. Let's say I want my student to match. 1 second. Here we are. Let's say we have 3-dimensional objects. We have Post-its, we have a highlighter, and we have a pen that's going to be put in a field of 3. I hope you guys can see that on the camera. I'm going to tell my student match and give them the object I want them to match. The correct response would be that they match Post-it with Post-it. When they do that, I would say, good job matching, and I would write a plus on my data sheet. If, for example, my student matches incorrectly, highlighter with Post-it, I would rearrange the operands. So that means I would change the position of the Post-it, the pen, and the highlighter. And then I would say, try again, match, and show them through prompting the correct match. This is how we match. And then I would go and represent the antecedent and see if they can do it independently. So what I'm kind of trying to explain here is when we're teaching a new program to our supervisees, we're doing it at the supervisee's rate. We're giving opportunities to ask questions, and we're making sure we're clear on what we're expecting from the student and what we're expecting the supervisee to do. So let's just go through that 3-term contingency. Let's break down the learn unit. We're looking at the antecedent, right? So our antecedent would be that the student is given these 3-dimensional objects and they're presented in a field of 3, and we're going to give them that vocal direction, match. Then the behavior that we're targeting is that the student will take the object and match it to the identical object in the field of 3 within 3 to 5 seconds of the antecedent. Now we're going to go into the consequence. So if the student emits a correct response, we're going to record a plus and they're going to receive vocal praise. If the student emits an incorrect response, so meaning they don't respond, they match incorrectly, or they emit an incorrect response and they go, oh, wait, no. And then the correct response, that's also a minus. And then we're going to go through the correction procedure again. So modeling, the antecedent is represented and the student is giving an opportunity to independently respond again. Then we're going to explain if the correct response is admitted during the correction, no reinforcement is delivered. So let's see how good I did kind of giving you guys that instruction and modeling, because I'm going to give you guys an opportunity to practice. So if you guys have any paper or a pen, Post-its, anything close to you, I'll give you guys like a few seconds to kind of see what's in your environment. And we're going to watch a YouTube video together, and we're going to watch 3 learn units. So 3 opportunities for the student to respond. And then we're going to look and see which TPRA is correct. And then I'll give you guys some feedback depending on what we get on the polls. So hopefully while I was rambling a little, we were able to get some paper and pen. And I'm going to move on to the next slide. So here is a student, and we're going to take data on the teacher implementing that program based on what we just went over.
Just say 1, 2, 3 or something.
Right.
All right, ready. Match.
Yay! Let's do another one.
So I'm going to give you guys a second. That's your first learn unit. We saw the antecedent, the behavior, and the consequence. So I'll give you guys a few seconds to write it down on a piece of paper and see what you guys think. So okay, awesome. And I see a lot of hands are being raised and questions are coming in. I will definitely get to all these questions. I just want to make sure we have time to review everything because there is a lot of material we're trying to cover. So let's take a look at the next learn unit.
Same.
Do the duck. We've never done the duck. Right? We've never done it.
No, you don't have this. Match.
Yay!
Hey, amazing. That's the second learn unit. So I'll give you guys a few seconds to go ahead and write what you think as the responses. And just for anyone who may be a little bit confused with the codes that we use, check is if the antecedent is being delivered correctly. If the antecedent is not delivered correctly, it's a check with the circle. The student's response is the next thing you would record. So plus or minus, plus for correct responses, minus for incorrect responses. And then the correction, whether reinforcement or correction. R if the reinforcement is being delivered correctly, R with the circle if it was delivered incorrectly. And then you have C for the correction if it's done correctly, and then C with the circle if it's being done incorrectly or it didn't happen at all. We're going to do another learn unit now. So hopefully that's giving you guys some opportunities to write it down.
MOV even.
What?
MOV even. See?
Match. Thank you.
It's keep it close to him. And that's the say again. 6.
Match. Match.
Good.
Wait.
Do this.
Do this.
And
Match.
sorry, these are good. That's a harder object, I think.
Fold your hands. Match. Match. I know.
Good job! Yay! You did it!
Okay, I'm going to stop that there. Give you guys a few seconds to write what you think that third learn unit is. Was the antecedent correct? Did the student admit a correct response? Was the teacher admitting the correct reinforcement or correction procedure? So I'll give you guys a few seconds and I'm going to turn to the next slide.
Just say 1, 2, 3 or something.
Right.
Okay, and so this is going to bring us to our poll. And so this poll is to see which TPRA, if you had conducted it, is correct. So go ahead and submit your answers, and we'll take some time with this. You guys are really quick. This is great. Okay, we're getting our answers coming in pretty soon. Great, and let me share some of these results. Okay, so this is definitely pretty impressive for what I'm assuming is most people's first time doing something like this. 56% of us admitted the correct response, so it's pretty great. Let's run through this a little bit and kind of walk through why the first one is the correct one. So for the first one, we saw that she delivered the correct antecedent, match. The student matched correctly, and she provided reinforcement. Yay! Then in the second response, she did a very good job, again, presenting the antecedent. Everything was in a field of 3. The student admitted the correct response. We gave the reinforcement. Yay! Now moving into the last segment that we saw, the last learn unit that we went through together. The antecedent was correct. She did say to match. Let's say if in a perfect world, her data sheet also showed a minus. So the supervisee put minus. She wrote the correct student behavior, that it was incorrect. The error here is in the correction, right? So we notice that she goes through the correction procedure. She represents the antecedent. She allows the student to emit the correct response independently, and she's also modeling to the student how to match. The error is, and at the end she says, good job. So she reinforced that correction procedure, and that's why we would circle it. And so how would we deliver that feedback if I were the supervisor? I would start off by emphasizing, hey, you did a really good job with your presenting your antecedent, great job recording student responses. You were very great at reinforcing his correct responses. How about we work on the correction? So let's do one-on-one together. Let me show you how to do the correction, and then you try it on me. So again, we're modeling, we're rehearsing, we're providing positive feedback with constructive feedback. So that's how we do the TPRA. And I'm going to move us to the next slide, which brings us to our first code. Shocking that our first code is TPRA. So please, please, please write this down, because you're going to need this for the end of the webinar.
It says February 10th. Sorry about that. That's supposed to be February 17th. So please write your code, and you'll need to complete the survey by Friday, February 17th at 9 a.m.
Awesome. So I'll give you guys a few more seconds again to write down that code, which is TPRA. And then I'm going to jump over to the next slide in 3, 2, 1. Okay. So we have a little bit, 10 minutes, Kristen, I think, left. And I want to kind of review some of the questions that are coming in before I go over this section. This section is kind of a section that I typically go through pretty fast, and specifically with this group, you guys have already had experience. Most of you know about the ethics code. I kind of just wanted to go over a refresher, but predominantly want to talk about a little bit more about what we just talked about. So, Kristen, do I just click on Q&A, or where should I?
Yeah, if you want to answer some questions now, or if you want to save them for the end, it's up to you.
Okay, so if we're looking, is this how I look here for the Q&A? So I see an anonymous attendee let's see. I worked at a private school many years ago that used the TBRA system with the director / supervisors would sit in our class, a person teacher GA one at a time. They checked the ABC of the teacher knew whether the error was on the teacher or on the student.
Blanca, can you read the last part of that out loud?
Yeah, sorry. I was just going through some of the questions. I'm trying to see which are questions and which are like kind of just sharing their thoughts. But one of the questions I see here is, would you rearrange the field if the response was incorrect? Yeah, really good question. Yes, I would rearrange the items in the field, because what we don't want is the student to be matching based on orientation as opposed to knowing that the objects are identical. So great question. You're absolutely correct at answering and asking that. So yeah. How do you handle using TPRA on multiple supervisees? Okay, so there's a few ways of doing it. Personally, for myself, I like to kind of schedule one-on-one time with my supervisees. So like when I'm first starting to train, I want to make sure that when I'm teaching these programs, I'm not just like sending them in blind. Within an at-home model, it's a little bit easier, right? Because we are one-on-one, it's typically just one RBT. And so I can devote that time. In a classroom setting, at least in my experience, my supervisors who have supervised me have kind of done joint supervision sessions in which my partner and I, or the person that was being supervised, are both running through that instruction, that model, that rehearsal. And then we'll kind of role play with each other, see us get to mastery running that program, and then implement it with the student and one-on-one supervision. So trying to do it that way. I hope I answered that question to the best of my ability. And I'll definitely go ahead and kind of think that question a little bit more and then post it on our website to be able to, or Instagram page, I think it is, to answer that fully. But on the spot, that's kind of what comes to mind for me. Is the chat for you, Kristen?
Yeah, they just have Q&A.
Okay, great. So that's the questions that came up, which are great. I'm glad I got to answer those. And then I'm kind of just going to speed through the BACB code and ethics of supervision, because we've already, most of us here and the webinar know enough about it. So the reason why I'm even bringing up the code right now is because I believe that the code is effective in providing guidance for supervisory practices. I think that it does a really, really good job at listing those ethical requirements and some of the disciplinary actions that could be taken. I think it's important for us to kind of go over examples sometimes, because I think it could be a very daunting and confusing thing to go over initially when you're first coming into the field, at least which was for me. So the first part of the behavior analyst as a supervisor. So I'm just reviewing kind of the components of the ethical code in relation to supervision. We want to make sure that we're competent in whatever we are teaching and supervising in. If we don't have competency in something, we should go and get training or consultation on it before we go ahead and supervise others in doing it. This brings us to the next bullet. But when we're talking about developing new competencies, we can do things like looking at the literature, going to professional seminars or trainings. We can be looking at CEUs. We can look into, do we need extra requirements or credentialing? So that brings me into the idea of the competency. I'm going to put up this poll in terms of a question that I think is something that I had to learn the hard way. Can supervisory volume, the number of supervisees that a BCBA takes on, affect their performance? Wow, you guys are quick. It's great. Wow, that is so fast. I had a feeling you guys would be fast with this. Great. And so what I'm seeing here is that 100% of us are saying yes, and that is absolutely the correct response. 100%. Yes, it does affect our ability. It does affect our performance. And so that brings me on to the next one, supervisory volume. We want to make sure that we're focusing on quality over quantity. And sometimes, we go into this field because we want to help, right? And so we take on more than we can handle. And sometimes doing that, not being able to establish those clear boundaries, can really put pressure on us to kind of pump through our supervisees, right? We're just checking off lists now, and we're not individualizing that supervisory relationship. And so we want to make sure that we're not taking on more than what we can handle. That's kind of why I included that slide. And then supervisory delegation. So this is an area that I really want to kind of say we want to be intentional and responsible with the responsibilities that we give the people that we're supervising. What I mean by that is making sure that we meet our supervisees where they're at, and that we slowly and systematically build their skill set. And with that, what we're giving them as responsibilities. We never want to overwhelm the people that we're supervising. And we also want to make sure that we're not giving our work as BCBAs or as supervisors over to them, because we just don't want to do our work. Maybe we want to make sure that everything that we give our supervisees is intentional and for their benefit. So questions to ask. Does the individual have the necessary prerequisite skills to complete the task? Did I give them adequate training to be able to do this task? And is this task that I'm giving them relevant to their job or their role? Making sure that we're using effective supervision and training methods, all of what this hour has been about. We want to make sure that we have a good system of communication with our supervisees. So that brings me back into making sure that the supervisor and the supervisee relationship is clearly defined and discussed. Both parties understand the nature of the supervisory and supervisory relationship, and that we are making sure that the requirements are discussed. So some examples of the requirements are time requirements, skills that we need to develop or skills that they may not have that we're going to develop, what's mastery criteria for the skills I'm expecting them to learn, and in extreme cases, when should a supervisory relationship be terminated? Then, and I'm moving quickly because I know we have 1 minute, I want to get to that code. So providing feedback to our supervisees. We went through that, how to give back positive and corrective feedback, trying to use reinforcement as much as possible, collect data and establish effective documentation. And we want to make sure that our decisions for our supervisees are made through the data that we're collecting. Making sure that we're evaluating the effects of the supervision. So how effective am I as a supervisor is the question I like to ask myself all the time. And we can do that through the data that we're collecting. And that brings us to code 2, decisions. So go ahead and write that down. Again, like Kristen was saying, I think you guys have until the 17th to fill out that survey. So you need that code. Code 2 is decisions. Give you guys a few seconds. 4, 2, 1. Okay. And that brings me to the end of my very first webinar. Thank you guys so much for giving me this chance, and all your feedback is appreciated on how I can improve. So thanks, guys.
Blanca, thank you so much for talking about evidence-based supervision. It was refreshing. Thank you everyone here for joining. We had a really great turnout. So thank you to everybody who participated.